and blessings, family. Welcome back to another edition of What is the Time, a podcast about celestial timing, personal sovereignty, and living where the getting is good. Today, I got my friends back on the show. I got my friend Pallas. I got my friend Cameron. These folks are brilliant astrologers who are going to hang out with me and talk about the forecast of wintertime in the northern hemisphere in 2023. This is we got big stuff going on in the sky. We got big stuff going on the earth that is going to do, and these two are going to go together, and so we're going to spend a little time with the forecast. Thank y'all so much for being here. Thank y'all for being with us here today. If you want to support the production of this kind of content, if you want to get in and see it early, it's going to come out early for the patrons. You can get on Patreon and support there. I also do an electional report there, which gives you times of the month. Every month I go through every day and talk about times that are good to launch your product, or to send that first text to somebody you like, or something like this. There's a bunch of options there. If you want to send me a tip via Venmo, Cash App, PayPal, that continues to be super, super helpful. If you want to go to Spotify, Tidal, Pandora, and check out Can't Help Myself. I always love when people are adding the song to a playlist or adding it to your favorite list or whatever it is. Thank you so much for being here. I super appreciate all of the fam for showing up. And today we have Pallas and Cameron. We're going to talk about the forecast of the wintertime. Let's talk about it. Thank you, Pallas and Cameron, for being here.
Thanks, everyone. Hi, Cameron.
What's up? Yeah, I'm always excited to talk to y'all. So much learning and sharing. Love it.
For real, every time. Learn so much from the two of you. And, one of the things that I was thinking about before we did this in the first place was why do we even do forecasts? And there's, to my mind, it's just really helpful to get an idea, because a lot of times I start to feel like wheel spinning, and I just don't know how to move forward, and I get confused about stuff a lot of times. And so it can be really helpful to just understand the basic topography of the time that we're in. And so one of the things that I always end up telling my clients is oh, you're right on time. They're going through whatever it is, they're going through a breakup, or they're going through something hellish. And I'm oh, no, you're right on time right now. Just do your thing, go through that. And so I find that helpful to be able to tell to people. I find that super helpful in my own life. And so that's why we're here. We're here to learn about the time ahead and get an idea. So let's do it.
Yeah.
So how do you guys feel, broad strokes overview of this upcoming season? I keep wanting to call it Q1, but I know, Cameron, you've got another idea about how that works, right? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So I would call this Q4, just based off of going off the seasons, and the springtime being the beginning or the new year. And so, yeah, and I mean, really at any turning point, it could be the beginning or the end in some ways, And so I would invite everybody to think about that and feel into it and what's true for them, because even in some people's charts, they feel like, oh, I always blossom forth during the summer, or I blossom forth during the fall season. And so I think it's good to contextualize that for oneself, but then also if they're working with other people and at the world at large, just to contextualize it in the way that feels true for them.
Yeah, the relationship between this light and dark, right? Of course, it's different versus northern versus southern, right? It's I tend to think of winter solstice as kind of the beginning of summer, just because this light starts increasing, right? But of course, it doesn't get to halfway, it doesn't get to even. And so there's not more light than dark in the northern hemisphere until that equinox point. And so there's just a slight distinction there in how you relate to those cardinal points in your chart too, is going to say a lot about, and whether your day chart or night chart, how you relate to these tropical seasons is definitely contextual. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that idea about the solstice, the winter solstice. Ursula Le Guin calls that one the festival of sun return, because the sun has been leaving for so long, and then finally it turns around and it's oh, the sun is coming back, hooray.
As a
Mm.
very diurnal baby, it is a point of celebration for sure.
Totally, totally. So should we talk about that? Should we talk about that Capricorn stuff, the Capricorn ingress and all this?
Yeah, I wanted to bring up just because I've been learning from Ali Alomi in that tradition, they cast a chart for the Aries ingress every year, and depending on what the rising sign is, it'll give indications whether you should cast the tropical chart of each season, or if you should cast the chart for just the equinoxes. And so this year, it was a mutable rising sign during the Aries ingress, where we
Hmm.
casted it at. And so that means we would still be
What was
on
the
the
rising
Libra.
sign?
If I'm not mistaken, it was Virgo rising. I
Hmm.
could be mistaken on that. Or no, it was Gemini rising. It was 27 degrees Gemini exactly. Yeah. And so and so we would cast it for the Aries ingress and then the Libra ingress. So I'm still learning that. And so I'm still working with the Libra ingress, even though the Capricorn ingress will still have precedence as well.
Mm-hmm. That's it. So I didn't think to pull up the Libra ingress chart. Do one of you have it? You should be able to
Yeah, I
share your
have it.
screen. So if we're thinking broad strokes here, we should take a look at this chart and think about where we're at in time relative to this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so here's the Libra ingress chart, and it's the one that we used last
Oh
time.
yeah.
So it's still a lot of the same things going on. It's kind of the way I was thinking about things.
Hmm.
Not only just based off the Libra ingress chart, but just in general, we're still like it's like we're close to the end of the newness of like since things have happened in 2020. That's the way I've been thinking about it a lot. And this
Hmm.
chart still is like echoing really, really strong right now. And I think it will throughout the Aries ingress. And and I have looked at the Capricorn ingress as well, even though I don't have it saved right now. But this is the one I'm still like working with. And I do think it's bringing like the same type of warnings that it was bringing from before.
Hmm. So when you say the end of the newness, that's so interesting. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I just feel like since 2020, like everything has felt so brand new. And I feel like we're coming to like with all that is still happening, but we're coming to some type of a bridge to like feel settled in what is new. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, totally. So so we're in this like wider period now. And so if we're thinking about 2020, then we might be thinking about the Saturn Pluto conjunction that happened that year that was so major. And then so if we're thinking about Saturn Pluto in Capricorn, and then that is immediately followed by Jupiter Saturn in Aquarius. And
Right.
that's still all Saturn time. It's Saturn ruling Capricorn, Saturn ruling Aquarius. And so there's big Saturn structural changes taking place, the infrastructure of things that wants to be changed in such a major way, relative to Pluto. That's going to be one of our like strong outer planets that's going to talk about, the sort of underworldly, the inevitable changes that always take place, no matter what happens. If you're in a body, then at some point that body is going to come to rot and that sort of thing, like that, the inevitability of that. So we can think about Saturn, Pluto as sort of thinking in that direction, and then we can think about the Jupiter, Saturn as well as sort of like being a like moving toward the next 200 years of history and
Mhm.
sort of like being in that moment, and that all being described by Saturn rulership. And so one of the things that I think is really interesting here is that if this is the end of this beginning, then we are still in this transitional moment for another little bit of time here. We've still got, for this whole season, for this whole quarter, we've still got really strong Saturn rulership. We've got Saturn in Aquarius being great. Honestly, like love this Saturn. There's some really good Saturn elections and this kind of thing during this time. And but it's not so we are close to moving into a next thing, right? So like we are it's less transitional and more like okay, we're not there's a kind of acceptance that we're not going to go back to normal or something like this, whatever normal might have meant to you in 2019. We're not doing that anymore. And
Yeah.
so, and there's a kind of, it took a while for us to sort of like get used to that idea. Throughout 2020, we continued, even those of us who knew better, we still would like think back and be like, oh, but like it was so cute. I want to do that again. And so now we're moving toward like, okay, maybe not. Maybe we're not going to do that. And that is now normal.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of how I've been thinking about it. You have the Capricorn ingress chart, yeah?
I do. I do.
I think it's kind of the same moon phase too, which very much feels like end of the beginning.
Yes. So it's on the 23rd of December,
Oh, that's
2022. This is
the
the new moon.
lunation, I think. Yeah.
It's the new moon in Capricorn, which is like a day after the ingress. So I don't have the Capricorn ingress chart, but this felt like it was like really hidden to me.
Yeah. And
Yeah, I guess the one thing you have before this is it's like the sun ingresses into Capricorn and immediately squares that Jupiter just ingressed into Aries. It's like it's a very potent new moment.
Yeah, big time cardinal energy there, like all the newness, all the things getting started here. And then to have the new moon immediately right there, also square to that Jupiter, that really feels like a kickoff point. But so what does it mean for us to have a kickoff point at the end of a transitional period?
The way I've been feeling into it is just like, I think people are in more acceptance of things aren't going back to how they used to be more than anything. And they're starting to like root themselves into the new cycle overall. That's kind of how I've been feeling into it. Like not necessarily for myself or a lot of people that I know, because people that I know kind of know what's going on. But for just like in a mundane sense or like in general, people are like starting to accept that things aren't the way they were. And so it's like the end of the beginning of accepting the age of air as is going to be moving forward.
Yeah, like a reconciliation kind of, or like the beginning steps in that, and how like and I mean, coming from Canada, that's a very like loaded term for sure, but there is a way that it is both a recognition that something will never be the same and that you can't go back, and yet also it is a step towards something new, towards a new relationship. And that feels really relevant, like in the clients I'm speaking to, and just how people are kind of coming to terms with things they lost that they thought they were going to get back. And now they're like, oh, I spent 2 years sort of avoiding the grief of this. And here we are now with like 2 years of grief sitting in my body.
Yeah. One thing I'll point out too about the Capricorn ingress chart is that the moon is opposing Mars in the ingress chart. And so we can't see that here on the screen, but that's something that's like significant to like be mindful of as well. So.
Yeah, I've really been feeling like, so like when we released this, it's like the previous month, right, that we talked about last quarter, and like these oppositions during Sag season between Mars and the Sun and Venus and Mercury, and just like I've been really feeling it at sunset, right? Because it's like all those planets set and Mars immediately rises. And it's just like, and so feeling that in the Capricorn ingress chart, like with the moon at that degree, and like the moon setting and like Mars rising immediately, and just how like throughout the course of the nights, like Mars is just dominating in the sky, and yeah, really
And that's one of
prompting
our.
a lot of that change. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was that last bit? I missed
Oh,
it.
just that, like that, just the prevalence of those Mars oppositions are really prompting a lot of this, like recognition.
Yeah. And that prominence of Mars is like, so it's Mars and Gemini throughout this whole quarter here, right? And so we've had Mars and Gemini. We also had Mars and Gemini through the whole quarter that came before this. And so it's just so we're really in kind of like more of the same territory here, where it's just like a lot of this kind of same stuff coming up over and over. And so now, we're going to be looking at this Mars in Gemini. So Mars in Gemini, so if we've got in the ingress chart, then we've got the moon opposite to Mars, then that is going to sort of highlight this Mars retrograde and all of the review things and the revision. Whenever we see a retrograde planet, then we can always think that the words are going to show up, right? We're going to have to take another look at it. We're going to have to re-examine or reevaluate in this kind of thing, reevaluate whatever Mars has been doing in Gemini. Gemini is an area that tends to like to think of things or to make things intelligible or to dissect things or this kind of thing, right? Mercury is very much about sort of taking things and making them into smaller component pieces in order to sort of understand how the whole operates by way of understanding the atomized level, right? And so Mars has been moving backwards through that area, calling for revision or reevaluation of whatever that is for you. And a lot of times that'll be like some kind of action plan that needs to be reorganized or thought through again, right? And so to see that being highlighted in the Capricorn ingress chart gives us the idea that throughout this period of time, that Mars retrograde is going to weigh heavy on the whole thing. And indeed, for a couple of in a couple of weeks' time, then Mars is going to station direct, and then is going to be moving forward through the all of this same territory, and we're just going to be hanging out with Mars in Gemini this whole time period and dealing with all that.
Yeah, and I think it's really been like helping people be able to, chop up the way they were mentally organizing everything, so that they can reorganize it going into the age of air even more and like solidifying that, just like what we were saying before. So I think it's been really helpful for Mars to be going through Gemini in that way.
Totally. And that's one of the things that I've noticed about this Mars retrograde in general is that, so like the last Mars retrograde that we had was in Aries, and it was square to Saturn in Capricorn, and that was hellish. It was terrible. Like it was,
People were in a lot of pain.
Yeah, exactly. That's like all I can really say about it, right? And so that was kind of my expectation going into this Mars retrograde in Gemini. But this Mars retrograde in Gemini has a lot of help. Like there's this great trine from Saturn in Aquarius, just stabilizing, being like, okay, slow it down, bring it back. You can't even go forward right now. Just slow it down a little bit at a time, step by step. I can't stop saying slow and steady wins the race. That I just say that every damn day. Almost every client I talk to, I'm like, listen, you're not there yet, so take your time. And if you're not there yet, then good. Again, you're right on time. This kind of thing, right? So that to me is really interesting. The other thing that I think is interesting here for this new moon in Capricorn is that so the folks that are in Capricorn is the moon, the sun, Venus, Mercury, and Pluto. And we can see that Venus at 16 degrees of Capricorn is making an overcoming trine to Uranus in Taurus, who Venus also rules. And so if we're looking at this as being a moment of really leaning into I'm not going to get back my 2019 lifestyle or, these kinds of things, then to my mind, this Venus Uranus situation feels really, I don't know, hopeful. It feels like they want to help each other out. It feels, I've been talking about Uranus and Taurus as necessity is the mother of invention, right? And especially with that square to Saturn, then there's all this like obligation or whatever. But to see this Venus here as well, that really gives me the sense that like there's a cleverness here, especially like we've got Pluto here in Capricorn as well, and Mercury is here as well. Like it really feels like working it out and thinking around how to make everything work, especially with that square new moon in Capricorn square to Jupiter in Aries. That feels like a total possibility. Like, oh yeah, we can make this work. We can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And then Jupiter also has some dignity there too, as well.
Mm.
So that's even adding a little extra boost to it. It's in some bounds, if I'm not mistaken. And so everything you were saying with the Venus overcoming Uranus is just like an echo of that too. So that's really nice.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and thinking of that, like Uranus right on the ascendant and the Libra ingress chart too, and just like the instability of that we've seen everywhere, especially in like food, right? And
Mm-hmm.
having that Venus in that overcoming, and that's also right there is where the Venus Cazimi mid Venus in Capricorn retrograde last year is right there. And then also thinking here
Mm-hmm.
about it's like inversion, but we have Mars as like the exaltation ruler of all that Capricorn too, plus ruling the Jupiter, right? There's a lot of juice in that, yeah, in those Capricorn placements there, and in that process of, yeah, helping reorganize, and it's like reportion. It's like people, redoing their budget, whether that's like a financial budget or energy or, yeah, just their health or how they're spending their time. This moon really speaks to that process, I think.
Hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In general, about this time, I tend to think that it is a little less, I don't know, it doesn't seem that hectic to me. You know what I mean? Like in the last one, every time we had a lunation, I was like, oh, and this one, okay, look out, you guys. And whereas this one is like, it's a new moon. We got a square to Jupiter. There's a bunch of juice here. Like slow and steady wins the race. Maybe don't try to like explode out the gate and like try to get everything done, which is something that cardinal placements can do sometimes. But if you know, Capricorn is the slowest of the cardinal signs for sure, and it's ruled by a super strong Saturn, who is also just not getting fucked up by other shit anymore. You know what I mean? Like the square to Uranus is waning. It's not, the Saturn in Aquarius has had a lot on its plate throughout this whole time, but this Saturn still outside the beams of the sun and all this, like this Saturn looks great. It looks real strong and able to do its damn thing. And so if you keep this sort of like plodding texture to or tempo to the thing, then like it honestly feels pretty hopeful to me. And it feels a little bit like, there are some big predictions about 2023 and how like apocalyptic it may be, and there's some like really hectic stuff that it looks like, I've heard some people, especially the Armstrong model tends toward like mayhem in the coming year. But at this moment, it feels like shit's still working, you know, and I like it. I like it for that.
Well, I think it's a lot about people making it work. Like, and
Hmm.
it's people coming together to make it work. And that feels like that Venus partially. Um, yeah. And then
Hmm.
heading into this, right? It is like we're heading into this Mercury retrograde right at that point. So it's not like there's just this lunation and then like that's it for this energy. We have this like Mercury stations like just a week later and then like moves backwards through all of that. Yeah, it stations at like 24 with Venus, right? And
Hmm.
then,
And
moving
Pluto.
all the way back to I think like 8 degrees, which is, as you pointed out before we started recording, it's like that is the Venus retrograde degrees was like from 26 Capricorn to 11. So it's exactly the same terrain.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a big deal. That's a real big deal, especially since that Mercury is also ruling that Mars, right? Mercury
Mhm.
retrograde in Capricorn is still going to be ruling Mars in Gemini.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit
And then rules
like
Jupiter. Yeah.
rules Jupiter for sure. Yeah, so it's a little bit like the like Mars direct isn't quite direct yet. Like so the Mercury retrograde, this happens what, like the 29th of December is when the station is, as far as I could find it. And
Mhm.
so, that, and then there's going to be like 3 weeks of that. And so there'll be like a little bit of overlap there between the Mars retrograde and the Mercury retrograde. But then Mars is going to station direct, but Mercury's still going to be moving backwards
Mhm.
and still going to be like in Pluto town, you know?
Mm-hmm.
looking at power dynamics, looking at, the invisible set of power dynamics. And, whenever I think about Pluto, then I always bring up the funhouse mirror and the confusion that can result as you look into the funhouse mirror, or as you look into the abyss, right? And then get really confused about what's going on. It's a little bit like how if you sit in silence, in complete silence, then the ringing in your ears can get really loud. The stuff that's inside you that might always be happening gets really loud if you drown everything else out, right? In that unseen space, then that's how, and then you can get, this is how we get things like, oh, my eyes are playing tricks on me, and this kind of thing, right? Like there's definitely a trickster component to Mercury retrograde as well as Pluto. So looking at that, it definitely it wants to harken back to that Venus retrograde that we had in Capricorn. So we're looking at probably like themes, resurgent themes through that time, whatever that might have been.
Yeah. And then Mercury also is going to be in connection with Neptune there a little bit. So even like adding to like the kind of confusion potential. One thing I was noting too as well with the Capricorn new moon was that it was conjunct the asteroid Ea. People call it Hygeia, but it's really called Ea. And so something around like spiritual hygiene or energetic hygiene. And so when we have all these power dynamics going on, or the House of Mirrors energy, we want to make sure that we're staying composed in the words that we're saying, so we don't get caught up in that House of Mirrors, and stay really clean about it. Is something that I'm feeling into as well.
Yeah, in that chart too, that Capricorn new moon chart is like, that's the day that Chiron's stationing direct too. And when I was just like thinking of this kind of overall quarter, it definitely feels like and possibly, heading into that potential chaos of, especially sort of summer is like my feelings about it. That real, like this Chiron and Aries transit, right, is all about people sort of like coming back and finding the center and that like sovereignty within oneself, that like exalted sun energy, and like finding the medicine in it, not just the ways in which it's been mutated, right, by all the systems that are a little bit too solar, but having that energy with that Capricorn and square it, and then moving through this retrograde with Mercury, and like Mercury is in that sextile to Neptune, and then in that trine with Uranus too, and like similar to, and makes that trine like a couple times, I think. And so having all that like outer planet energy into this too, that like spiritual centeredness feels. And in the northern hemisphere, of course, like when there's still more dark than light, I think it's sort of easier to, at least for my inner self, it's easier to access that that kind of almost like Plutonian groundedness, right? Which like has it supersedes whatever circumstances are going on in your present life, and really roots you into those like deeper forces.
Yeah. And what are you feeling off of the Mercury cycle now going into like the earth signs, the retrograde periods? Were you feeling into that too as well?
I like Mercury and Earth retrogrades. Like we get the Mercury, and we get the like exalted Virgo retrograde, right? Exalted Mercury retrograde. And that one's always like juicy, at least for, I don't know, creative output. I feel like especially it's a bit more hectic than the energy we have for this one. I mean, this is also these Capricorn transits that are happening. These are our last of 3 years of having these with Saturn in Aquarius, right? And the last of almost 6 years of having them with Saturn in Capricorn too. That's one of the things about this quarter I keep looking at, is just thinking about like, okay, this is the last, like, these are the last conjunctions. These are the last lunations and last retrogrades we have with these planets in these signs, right? Like both Pluto in Capricorn and also Saturn in Aquarius. And like, what does that kind of mean in terms of the overall Saturn processes we've been going through since it entered Capricorn, which feels like so long ago.
It was 2018.
Yeah. And like, and it's a different world with Uranus entering Taurus also in 2018. And like, yeah, Chiron entering Aries, like just around then too. There's that was new as well, but not as new as what we're dealing with now.
Right. Yeah, something I've been feeling into with Mercury retrogrades going into Earth signs, just like the information that moves through our body and how are you like channeling intelligence in the actual like physical vessel, and that being something important that we need to tune into throughout the year. So yeah, it's great reflection.
I love that so much. I've been thinking so much recently about the idea of communication, like what even am communication. I feel like that's real, like era of Earth energy there. Like, what does it mean to be communicative and this kind of thing? And so I've been my little niece, she's 8 years old and she is being homeschooled, and so I'm her PE teacher, and so we go out and we do like hikes in the woods and this sort of stuff, and it's real nice time. And so we talk about like plants, and we look at the plants and be like, okay, well, what's this one? I've helped her to ID a couple of plants, and then we go out and we look at other plants and be like, is this the one that we know, or is this a different plant entirely? And so what we end up doing is we look at the signs and the signals that the plant is giving us. You know what I mean? By the shape of its body, the plant is trying to give you some information. So, for example, red berries, you don't want to eat the red berries. That's a warning sign, right? But because of the way that the berry is composed, it is showing you, it is communicating some information to you. Or thorns is another good example. If you see a bunch of thorns in an area, then that area is probably trying to put up a keep out sign, right? And so does it need to be words that say keep out? That's very air. Or if we're going to do Mercury in an earth sign, the intelligence of the body, the way that you were talking about, Cameron, then we can look at the way that it is shaped and come to learn and understand things about it that way. And like, and then where does that stop even? Like the communication is all over the place. Information exists in all of the places, in all of the things that have bodies. And so how do we navigate that? So I love what you're talking about there, Cameron.
Yeah, I told myself, like I have it written down somewhere back at home. It was like, I said something like, oh, respond to people's body more than you respond to their words and opinions. Just like that's like a practice I'm going to have throughout the year, because I used to study people's posture a lot when I was working at the herb shop a lot. And I've like kind of gotten away from that, but I'm going to be sinking into that a lot this year, because people, the information is going to be always there. The body always is going to tell.
Totally. And when I was in herbalism as well, I like the smell would be a thing that would be an important factor in an intake. Like the way that a person smells, the way their breath smells, or the way their body smells, or something like that will tell you a lot about how they feel, about what's going on in their body. Or the tongue is another good example of that, where like you can look at the tongue, and again, the shape, the color, and this sort of stuff will communicate a lot of stuff that the person probably won't be able to say in words, right? The words are insufficient to describe the phenomenon that's going on there. And so these Mercury retrogrades in earth signs that are going to be taking place all year are going to give us sort of a window into how to better operate in that body communication sphere.
Well, and for a lot of people who experienced really severe and who are still experiencing isolation, right, from, the beginning of 2020, this is a time that a lot of people are venturing back out into in-person relating. And so those also, just the ways that isolation both interferes with our embodied expressions, right? And then also gives people like more slack to be comfortable in certain ways. And so there's a way that like, people are re-entering, right? We have these retrogrades, these earth retrogrades. They're like re-entering relationship in person that maybe they didn't have as much of over the past couple of years, and sort of, like remembering how to be a body with
Mhm.
more bodies. It's like, yeah,
Totally.
feels
And
like a
where have the
process
rules
for sure.
changed?
Yeah.
And where have the rules changed around that? And where has your own comfort changed around that? You know, in any direction possible, right? The like all of it is changing in such flux at all the times. So so yeah, that is, I've been finding myself in that a lot recently. Been out in the world and been like, what are the rules?
Totally.
Yeah, it's so true.
But yeah, for those of us who are olfactory inclined, Zoom life has not been kind.
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah.
For real. So then after that, then if we want to take it a couple of weeks forward here, so the 6th of January 2023, then we have the full moon in Cancer opposite the sun, and Mercury retrograde in Capricorn opposite to Pluto in Capricorn. One of the things that I noticed during this time is that, okay, so the sun or the moon is in Cancer, so the moon rules itself. But every other planet, including the moon, on all of the days that the moon is not in Cancer, every single planet is ruled by Saturn. And it's just like that until Mercury enters Pisces. So Mercury's retrograde in Capricorn. Mercury is moving backwards 2 signs away from that right now. So we've got basically a 3-month period of time here where everything is ruled by Saturn. So like Neptune, for example, is in Pisces, ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is in Aries, ruled by Mars. Mars is in Gemini, ruled by Mercury. Mercury is in Capricorn, ruled by Saturn. Saturn's in Aquarius, ruled by Saturn, right? So that chain of command always comes back to Saturn. And so again, this sort of speaks to, this is super strong Saturn time. Saturn loves being in charge. And Saturn is in such good position in Aquarius. Again, this is like Saturn is outside the beams. So once the sun comes up, then we've even got an ability to get Saturn, like a visible Saturn on the eastern horizon in a day chart. Like this is prime time Saturn elections right now, for the rest of this time period. And not only Saturn elections, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot with that is that, like, back at the very beginning of my serious astrological career, I started my first dailies my first daily was the spring equinox of 2018. And so around that time, so that's Saturn into Capricorn and this sort of stuff. That's my Saturn return and whatnot. And so at that time, Austin Coppock, who was such a major important teacher for me, he mentioned on the astrology podcast, listen, Saturn in Capricorn or Saturn in dignity is difficult, and it has a lot to do with consequences, challenges, and obstacles that sort of like, and you're thinking long term with that. And so a lot of times when you think about Saturn, especially Saturn being a malefic, that ends up looking like crime and punishment, the consequences for doing the wrong thing or doing a bad thing or something like that. But just as much as that, Saturn is associated with credit where credit is due, right? So if you hustle and put in your work on the front end, then you might end up getting back pay that you didn't even realize that you were going to get, and that sort of thing, right? And so what Austin said in 2018 was, be sure to get on the side of credit where credit is due. Make sure and hustle, get your infrastructure together, and take advantage of this Saturn as it is. So I've been saying that intermittently throughout this whole time, and it's been easy to forget that Saturn is in such excellent condition because it's been for so long. It's just normal. We're just used to Saturn being in such a strong position as to be like, fucking Saturn, chill, bro. Like, this is a lot. You know what I mean? That's been the vibe. But then where we're at now is we're running out of time. Like, Saturn is about to get real weird with this Saturn. As soon as Saturn moves into Pisces, then it's you know, like I've been thinking about like the shipwreck, you know, at the bottom of the sea. So it's structurally sound underneath the ocean, but then as soon as you bring it up in the air, then it falls apart. It just dissolves immediately. And so like
That's really good.
that kind of corruption is about to take place for Saturn for the next few years. And then after that, it's going to be Saturn, Neptune, and Aries. Like this Saturn is about to be whack for some time here. And so if you're still looking for getting in on credit where credit is due, we still have great Saturn throughout the rest of this quarter. And so now's a really good time to do that.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. The consequences. I like that's, yeah. When you were just saying that, I was thinking like the consequences that are really going to occur is when Saturn moves out of dignity is like what I'm thinking about, because like all the work that you did or didn't put in, it's like, did you turn your sailboat into a submarine instead of it like just like, you know, like that's kind of like what I'm thinking about, which kind of makes me excited because I feel good about where I've been with that. And also, yeah, going back to Saturn and grief, I would just say like, make sure you tap into that, because when Saturn leaves Aquarius, I think it'll be interesting to try to start the grieving process after that. And I would strongly invite to get into it now if you haven't sunk into it deeply already.
Yeah, some holding for sure, especially while like, yeah, this Venus in Capricorn and Venus in Aquarius to sort of support that process too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like using low tide to fix the bottom of your boat.
Mm-hmm.
So that's okay when high tide comes in.
Nice.
For sure. Big time.
Also,
big
in
time.
this full moon, we got the square to Chiron. So just people being mindful of like, with the Cancer full moon, is just like allowing that full moon to illuminate like what you're identifying with, you, like as far as your feelings go and how sensitive you can really be around that, you know, whether positive or negative, just like really allowing yourself to know that's coming and to attune to that more so than to fix it or not. It's like I always think just like the awareness of like being aware of the awareness before it even comes sometimes in and of itself is part of the healing process. So just being really, really mindful of that during this full moon.
Yeah, and this being the last full moon opposite Pluto in Capricorn, right? Which is like we've been having those since 2008. Like what?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what a full moon in Cancer not opposite Pluto would be. I don't even know.
So this like this lunation too, it's very like it brings that. So it's like whatever people's Capricorn house is since 2008, right? It's like it's only been present with Pluto present, and it's like so many of my clients are even younger than me, and it's like they haven't been tuned into astrology from before that. Right. And it's like I remember Pluto and Sag. Like that was a very, very different beast, right? But it's just like it's been going on for so long. And so being able to like, I'm also thinking of like the eclipses in like 2019, right? And like the Cancer Capricorn axis. And like there's just so much that will be that can be like dredged up. I love all these sand metaphors, ocean metaphors we're doing. And like actually sorted through for kind of like it feels like there's some relief. I mean, obviously Pluto and Aquarius is like a whole, like yet another different epic story, right? But when it comes to our Pluto and Capricorn stories, like there's shifts, like, and I know we say that a lot, but this is major. And so this lunation feels kind of like an encapsulation with the Mercury retrograde there, going over like all the stuff that, you know, Pluto would have gone over, making the same aspects to our cardinal placements that Pluto's trampled through over the last decade and a half. Yeah. So like part of that, seeing the ways in which the experiences of Pluto and Capricorn have landed, and of course landed in our bodies, right? And like landed in how we think about ourselves, and like how we identify with our feelings, with Chiron and Aries being involved in this moon too. That all
Mm-hmm.
feels relevant.
Also, on
Mhm.
a historical level, thinking about Pluto in Capricorn since 2008, there was a major financial change that
Yeah,
happened in 2008 that
massive.
reshaped the whole system, you know, and not just for Turtle Island people like we are, but like, you
Mhm.
know, that sort of had a global impact as well. And so then it was you mentioning Mercury retrograde over that right now that made me think about it. Like there's a review of that wants to
Yeah.
take place at this time, and probably a deeply emotional one as well if we see the full moon in Cancer opposite to that. You know, there's something here about a relationship to security and safety, a relationship, the ability to acquire resources and food and all of the nurturing things and all the moon stuff, right? And that sort of relationship seems like it wants to be a very big deal, and to dig in some places that might be uncomfortable.
Yeah, for sure. And just like that Uranus and Taurus, right? And this whole process and how people have talked about supply chains too, but then also,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's so many processes conspiring to like make it hard for people to feed their families. Like
Mm-hmm.
it gets down to being that basic and like that foundational of an issue. Um, yeah, and I'm feeling a lot of that, and I'm thinking about like how high food bank usage is right now, and just like people going to food banks and not having access to like the food they actually know how to use and like know how to cook, right? And so it's like the importance of it's like people think about like donating food to food banks when really it's like actually like if you're able to donating money to food banks is even better because then they can use that money to buy food that's relevant for their community that is like actually nourishing like actually the people they serve and thinking of like I don't know, seeing like Venus moving into Aquarius by the time this lunation happens. And it's just like that being mm, I don't know, there being this kind of like, and then Uranus being in the 11th in this chart too, right? Like this shift to collective thinking and people making it work. And that feels like a really potent part of this. And it's that seeing Pluto getting ready to move into Aquarius, it's like, okay, it's like since that recession in 2008 and, you know, reorganization of all of this. And it's like, we're in the consequences of that and like what comes next.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm feeling that with the both the Mars and the Mercury retrogrades. This sense of like a strong review has to take place in order for us to move forward, in order for us to like get an idea of what a next thing can be. We need to get a clearer idea of what this am first,
Mhm.
you know, because we've been like living through it and building it and doing it for so long, and that can maybe feel like it's up so close it's hard to even see what you're looking at. But now, you know, we've got the benefit of hindsight when it comes to 2008, and you know, we don't have hindsight for all of Pluto and Capricorn yet, but we've got a lot that we can look back on and sort of, you know, gather information and reorganize information and this kind of thing in moving toward whatever the next thing is going to be in Pluto and Aquarius as we move forward.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I mean from here, right? And I feel like we'll skip forward a bit, but between this and the Aquarius lunation, there's like Mars stations direct, and then Mercury stations direct a week later, like you were talking about Zamboni. And the day Mercury stations direct is actually like the Pluto Sun conjunction. So is actually this like new cycle of Pluto, and it's the last one in Capricorn before it moves into Aquarius. And that feels like you know, and that's just a couple days before this Aquarius new moon.
So are these the last lunations on Pluto in Capricorn? Like we're not gonna like because I know that Pluto's gonna be moving back and forth for a little while. Like Pluto's not
Oh
in
yeah. Oh
Aquarius
right,
and
right, right. Yeah.
Aquarius
Yeah, it's still
until
yeah.
2025. So I don't know if we'll
Yes.
get any
I haven't,
more.
yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's still going to be other lunations but it's going to be moving away from that
Yeah.
for a second.
Yeah, it hovers over the cusp of that for like quite a while.
Mm-hmm. Which is right where I have the ruler of my rising. Let me tell you, I'm excited.
But this is like the before the change, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
after the, and this feels like that trying to get that retrospective before everything changes. And not everyone's going to get that, right? Like not everybody has the time or the space or the energy to like go through a process like that because they're, you know, in a like more desperate mode. And so it's like, I feel like those moments when Pluto does come back into Capricorn are these kind of like chances, right? But this is kind of that last big push to make the Pluto in Aquarius transition happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool. So let's move forward here and think about the new moon in Aquarius. The new moon in Aquarius is, well, for one thing, it's right on the where Jupiter and Saturn had their conjunction, which is also where Mars and Saturn had a conjunction. Um, and so this is an air, and which is also where Pluto is going to be moving into Aquarius in a couple of months' time. And so we're not really going to touch on Pluto and Aquarius too much here in this one because we'll save that for the next time. But zero or the first couple of degrees of Aquarius is like a big area of sky. It's a very important, as we talk about the transition between the last historical moment and this coming historical moment and the sort of bridging the gap in between those, 0 to about 2 degrees of Aquarius seems like it's a very, very important area of sky relative to that process. And so here we've got the new moon in Aquarius there right at 1 degree of Aquarius, and it's involved in all that. How do y'all feel about this?
Yeah, something I'll add to all of that you already said is that it's also square the eclipse. So we're like it was square the like, last eclipses that we had. So
Yeah,
it's
tell
like a
that.
strong field. And so it's all the factors that you said plus the square to the one of the eclipses is just really it's a really potent new moon just in that and of itself. Yeah.
Yeah, this Venus Saturn conjunction too, which perfects like later or the next day. And Uranus is actually stationing direct here, which also feels potent thinking about that Venus. And then
I also noticed that the new moon is sextile to Jupiter in Aquarius or in Aries, so this as well as making this trine to Mars in Gemini, that feels like growth and expansion around whatever that Mars in Gemini has been trying to do, has been like thinking with for such a long period of time. We had this like 2-month Mars retrograde that was like confusing and so like difficult to actually get anything done and all this sort of stuff, and ruling that Jupiter, who's been so excited and ready to go in Aries, but can't quite do it because Mars isn't there, right? And then we get this new moon, which is so keyed into the wider historical moment, as well as the eclipses, as well as, there's so much going on here. But seeing the moon in this sextile, I like a sextile because there's something like cooperative and complementary about it, like a trine from Aquarius to Gemini, for example. Those are 2 air signs, so they see eye to eye in some way. I often think about like siblings or something like that. They like know how to get along together, whereas Aquarius and Aries, that's air and fire. So there's something complementary there. They offer something that the other doesn't have but wants. And so there's something there that wants to build, that really it feels like possibility. Again, it looks like great Saturn. Saturn just has this, not only rules everybody, but also has a lovely conjunction from Venus there as well. It also makes a sign-based sextile to to Jupiter in Aries. Like this is a great Saturn right now.
Yeah, one
I'll
thing I
miss it.
will go ahead, Pallas.
Oh, I was just saying I'll miss it. I'll miss the Saturn.
Hmm. Yeah, one thing I'll note here too, just like with this being such a strong new moon that's echoing so many things, and then also having the Mars in conjunction to Mercury, like just if you do have like a breathing practice or something that builds your lung capacity, that would be like really important because the age of air oftentimes brings what they call like pestilent winds. And so just like thinking about like how disease has manifested in the last few years, and then in conjunction from Mars to Mercury, it's just like, yeah, it's really strong. So I would just note that as something and watch out for your health around that time. When I say watch out, it's a warning as to build your health rather than a scare tactic. Also, that's something I think we should be really mindful of moving forward as things are transitioning a lot and at times hectic. That all these things that we talk about, even when it sounds like it's subjectively negative, these are all warnings, you know. And I listened to Ali Aolomi speak about how sometimes people say it's like doom and gloom, but really it's like if you know it's coming, it's a warning so you can prepare for it. And so just really starting to orient ourselves towards looking at future transits in that way is really important. Yeah.
Totally. That's why we do this at all.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about the fact that we won't have this like Saturn limit setting consequence machine, right? It's like the more that idea of like prevention, preparation feels especially notable. Yeah, looking forward to like Saturn in Aries too. There's like a period of that. And of course, this is that Mercury has gestation direct a couple days beforehand and it's like still at 8 degrees. And so that piece about breathing and feeling into the preparation around that is like recovery and right. It's like we're always in this process of like recovery and preparation and how those processes work together. Yeah.
1,000%.
Warning systems.
An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Beautiful. Love it.
And thank you, Cameron, for plugging my next product. The thing that I'm doing next, or that I'm doing right now, is I'm actually making some music to support a breathwork practice. I'm really into Wim Hof breathing. I think that it's a really good practice. I'm not super into Wim Hof, the like character, the Iceman, and this whole thing. Like I don't know about all that. I'm not super into all that. But the breathwork practice is perfect. It's a great situation. And so I've been doing his videos online, and so his video online has like music to go with it, but the music is kind of whack, and there's a beat, but the beat doesn't go with the breath, and like the mix is all wild, and it's like it's clear that like a non-musician put it together, you know what I mean? And so I got annoyed enough at that I was like, I'm just gonna make something cool. And so I made some music to go with to support that breath practice. And I'm currently in the process of doing that. And I hope to release that music around this time. So that's going to be perfect. Thank you for bringing that up for me, Cameron. I didn't even plan that.
Seamless.
That's awesome.
I'm excited.
Shout out to Odd Minds, who's also going to do the artwork on that. She did the artwork for Can't Help Myself, which is we also have next Can't Help Myself merch. We got hoodies, we got mugs and all this. Yeah, I stay with some tea in my cup, so definitely had to get a mug and all this. But so Odd Minds is the artist who made this image, and she also is going to make the cover art to the Breath of Life exercise. So
beautiful.
Yeah, it's gonna be great.
I love that.
That's what we need.
Yeah. So go to ZamboniFunk.com for all of these things. You'll be able to find all of it.
Something else.
Yeah. Talk about it. Hit it.
Yeah. Something else I wanted to point out. In the Washington, like where it's at in Washington D.C., Neptune's going to be on the midheaven. So just like also just that just echoes like something about the immune system and like health again as well. But also like potentially confusion out in the world could be a little higher there too. So just being mindful of that.
Yeah, one of the things that I keep running into with clients and family and all of the rest is that, like, uh, in a time where access to resources is in such flux, and in a time where, what wealth even is doesn't resemble the 2019 idea of wealth that we had in our heads. The 2019 wealth isn't really available anymore. It's not really on offer. You can't get there from here. And so if that's true, then what is wealth? How do I really find wealth? And so health is wealth is so annoying to say, but damn if it's not the truth. If your legs don't work good and they used to, and you can't walk the way that you used to be able to do that, you really notice that, and it really fucks up your quality of life. And so the really coming back to an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. A breathwork practice, an exercise practice, a sauna practice, or a sweat of some sort. Like, eat food, drink water, rest properly, go to bed at night. Like, these kinds of things, they
Totally.
they really go a long way in. And so, we're thinking with that. So we're thinking with body things. So we're going to be thinking with moon stuff. And so this new moon in Aquarius is there with Venus and Saturn, right? And Saturn's in great position. So this is a great time to get your routine together. You know what I mean? We're going to be into the new year. And like the new year, so when January 1st comes, I don't feel like that's going to be like new year time. It's not going to feel like new year time. We still got Mars retrograde. We still got Mercury retrograde at that time. Like, it's not time to get it moving forward yet. But if we're moving into the new year and people are looking at, getting your habits together, like new year, new me, and all of this kind of stuff, then, and doing that on the day to day, building better routines and habits and this sort of stuff, then this new moon in Aquarius is a great one for that.
Yeah.
I
Agreed.
might wait until the next day to do an election, let the moon start to wax a little bit, and then put that moon on Venus.
Mm.
You'll be able to find an electoral report at my Patreon.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I was looking at the because we talked about one of the half moons last time, and I feel like the half moon here that's with the moon in Taurus with the Aquarius sun, and then like the moon's right on the nodes, it'll be hitting off the eclipses, right? That feels like particularly potent thinking. So it's like thinking about this time period between the new moon and that half moon. It's like that week that we have there when like the moon will be with Venus, then with Saturn, then with Neptune, and then with Jupiter, and like then it'll be in Taurus and hit the nodes. This whole week feels like just a lot of active potential.
And that reminds me about what Cameron said in the last forecast that we did, which was anytime the moon is in, what was it, but 2 or 16 of degrees of any fixed sign, then that's gonna bring up the eclipse stuff that's going on. And so this new moon is keyed into that. The half moon that you're talking about is keyed into that. And so we're going to hear echoes and reflections of that throughout this time period until we get the next set of eclipses, which is not even part of this quarter that we're talking about.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, the full moon is like exactly at 16 degrees Leo too. So it's like both of them are like strong echoes.
And it's kind of quiet between, like, even just looking at my notes, it's kind of quiet in between the Aquarius new moon and the Leo full moon. I mean, relatively.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of,
Like you got
that's
a
one of the
Venus Mars
things.
square.
Yeah, that's one of the things about this whole quarter is it's kind of quiet. Like, there's not that much taking place here. We're getting ready for big things to take place. Pluto's going to move into Aquarius, Saturn's going to move into Pisces, Jupiter's going to have this whole time in Aries and then move into Taurus, and we're going to be and then that's going to be Jupiter with the North Node and with Uranus and all this sort of stuff, right? That's coming in 2023. That looks like major shifts, but we're not there yet. And that's one of the things that I mentioned in our pre-chat is that and this is going to be a time as well. This forecast is going to come out alongside a bunch of year ahead forecasts. I'm going to do a year ahead forecast with the Plant Cunning podcast, and Chris and them are going to do them, and all the astrologers are going to come out with a year ahead forecast at this time, right? And so we're going to be hearing a lot about Jupiter in Taurus and Pluto in Aquarius and all this sort of stuff. But it happens late enough in 2023 that I think it's well important to remember that we're not there yet, and we still have to be here now. We still have to live through and work with Saturn is still in Aquarius, and like all of the stuff. And this is part of the reason why we keep talking about reflections. All we keep talking about is like going back and thinking about, okay, so we need to go back to 2008 and see how that's been, and we need to go back to September of last year and see what's going on with Mars and Gemini, and how this whole process has been going on, et cetera, right? And so all of this sort of stuff, speaks to reflection and speaks to the end of this moment, which we still have to get through before we can get to the beginning of the next moment.
Exactly. Yeah. Which makes me, just makes me reflect on the thing I was saying, like how this is like a bridging period. Yeah, it makes me think of like when I'm sitting down and like boxing up products, like if I have like a bunch of big orders and I'm like boxing up products. And so I did a bunch of stuff, and I'm thinking about how I'm going to change things moving forward, but I still got to box all this stuff up and ship it out before I like try to go to the next thing,
And
It's totally real.
one thing that happens to me all the time when I get involved in that kind of thing is sometimes I'll get excited and I'll leave the boxing and like start to do the next thing, and then I'll like come back to it, and like time will pass or something, like a week will go by, and I'll be like, fuck, what have I done?
Yeah.
So
I'm so good for that. I'm good for doing all that and then like leaving to go to the post office, and the boxes aren't even with me when I get to my car. And so I'm like, I got to be here now. Yeah.
Big time.
Well, yeah, and I feel like that's part of this. And so this Venus Mars square that is just passed in this lunation, right? I feel like, yeah, if we're looking too far ahead to like Jupiter and Taurus, it's like there's this Venus in Pisces, right? Who even square Mars is still great. Like still great if we're thinking about processing grief, if we're thinking about moving through and imagining new ways to think about wealth, right? And like new ways we might access it. It's like Venus in Pisces is good for that. And then the square to Mars feels like because the Mars retrograde, Mars was in Gemini when Venus was in Virgo. Right. And so this is like Venus has gone through a whole half cycle. And so it's like square on one hand where Mars was overcoming, and now square from the other side, from the other mutable angle. And so it's like now this is Venus overcoming in this square. And there's something poetic about that in terms of thinking about this process of moving from and toward, which is part of this lunation.
Yeah, I was just about to say that, like this full moon in Leo, at the same time we get the full moon in Leo, the exact full moon in Leo, we also get an exact square from Venus in Pisces to Mars in Gemini. And so that it absolutely is coming up here. And you mentioned that Venus in Pisces is great. We'd love to see Venus in Pisces, right? This is our last Venus in Pisces before Saturn gets there. And so that's going to be a whole different vibe for a couple of years, and it's probably not going to be very fun on the Venus. With Venus and Pisces, you want it to be like lavish and just the most delicious things and all this sort of stuff, and then Saturn gets there and it's like, have you done your homework?
Yeah, I was thinking earlier today about the difference between Venus and Taurus and Moon in Taurus too, prior to Uranus moving in. I was just like, feels like kind of a different world.
Totally.
Right? And it's like that will be sort of similar, I think. It's like thinking about when Saturn was in Sag and Venus in Pisces, and how like that square was like so antagonistic to Venus in Pisces being able to do her thing. And this feels sort of similar. I don't know. I feel like there's more sympathy a little bit But yeah, it's still a change for sure. And it's very like recession Venus and Pisces.
Yeah.
Recession Venus and Pisces.
Oh, just like Venus and Pisces during a recession is like has a different mood than not in it, right? Like Saturn moving into that and being like,
Hmm.
okay, so wait, who's paying for this? Like,
Hmm.
what's the interest rate on that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what does a Venus and Pisces during a recession feel like to you? Because Venus in Pisces not during a recession seems like exciting, lavish, like like all of the fanciest, softest, sweetest, most delicious things all happening together, and the music is splendid, and we're all dancing together. And so, and then what about during the recession? What is like? Give me some images here to think with.
I mean, Venus and Pisces is really good at getting, especially with Neptune there, right? For the last decade. It's like Venus and Pisces is really good at getting lost, like in people, in the moment, in presence, in being a body, in whatever it's
Mm,
enjoying in the moment. Even more so than Venus and Taurus, who like still is kind of like able to be grounded in it, right? Venus and Pisces is like, oh, we can actually breathe underwater. Okay, like how deep can we go
hmm hmm
before like we explode? Um, and so, that process, it feels like Saturn moves in and is like, there might even be limits for you.
hmm hmm
Yeah. 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 Just as a Saturn and Venus conjunct native too, I'm actually
Mm.
feel kind of oddly excited about Saturn moving into Pisces and to have Venus there too, because I like I'm very disciplined about like my skincare routine and just like I'm very disciplined about pleasure. And so I think something about that, like just every time it goes through, I would invite people to get really disciplined about like maybe like meditating on how you can bring more pleasure into your life, doing the work to use your imagination to not get carried away. And
hmm
that can actually be something that makes pleasure more sustainable. And then with that too, it's going to go into Aries every time right after it. So then you could put direct action to it. And if you like orient yourself in that way during that whole period of time, then that could be something that's like actually manifesting positive for you, even if it's not necessarily ideally like super fun all the time.
hmm
Yeah.
hmm Okay. Yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great point there. So we're not. I see. I fell into that shit myself. We're not into Saturn and Pisces. We're we still have Saturn and
Right,
Aquarius
right,
right
right,
here.
right.
This is
Yeah.
our last time before
Yeah.
Saturn and Pisces.
Yeah.
Like I got lost in the sauce there. Venus and
Yeah.
Pisces very good at that.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing too about this, right? I feel like we're in so many of these like lasts and firsts. This, all of our Leo moons have been opposed Saturn for however long. And for those of us with Leo placements, like I love Saturn, we have a decent relationship, but I've missed my Leo moons like so much,
Mm.
so much.
For sure.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I'm a
Moon.
little antsy for Saturn ingress into Pisces for the sake of all the Leo placements everywhere.
For sure.
It's
For
like
sure.
we got it. We like learned the lessons.
Yeah, did we though? This full moon in Leo still wants to do Saturn Uranus, right? Like we thought we were done with Saturn Uranus.
Yeah,
The Saturn Uranus
that's
square
real.
is fading. Like, okay, like that's in the rear view by now. And then this full moon happens and wants to transfer the light in between a square to Uranus and an opposition to Saturn another time. So now we're back again. We're back looking at that stuff. You were talking about food prices. We were, all the Saturn Uranus things look like they want to come up here again. All the social unrest, all the uh, you know, reactions against the heavy Saturn, because Saturn has been so strong as to be oppressive. Then there's this Uranus who wants to rebel against that, who hasn't been super effective every time, but Saturn is like, but it's been a lot for Saturn to have to deal with, and now, and especially at this time, because Saturn has been ruling everything for so long, and you know it's been, for 3 months, Saturn has been ruling everything, and it's been just real nice. Saturn's been in such good position. It's like, the real strong Saturn types who are looking ahead are going to be, thinking about their long term, and they're going to be working on their infrastructure and all this sort of stuff. But the sort of like middle manager Saturn types might be in a mood to rest on their laurels a little bit,
Mm.
because like the
Mhm.
Saturn thing is operating so beautifully right now. Like, oh, we have generated the technocratic infrastructure to actually manage the thing, and now all I have to do is like mine the data or whatever it is, right? Like the thing is
Mm.
working so well that I don't have to worry about it too much. And then I feel like this full moon here kind of like is a jolt where it's like, oh, hold on a second, and there's like a little bit of a wake up call. And then at that same time, we can see here, so the sun is at 16 degrees of Aquarius and Saturn's at 26. There's only 10 degrees in between them. Saturn is now under the beams of the sun, right? And so this begins our decline. So Saturn is running out of ability to do the Saturn things as
Mm.
strongly in Aquarius. And so, but that is associated with invisibility, right? So Saturn, it's not just Saturn moving into a different sign and changing dignity, but it's associated with this sort of like going under the beams of the sun and not being seen anymore. So there's this sense of like, it's working, it's working, it's working, it's working, and then it's just kind of not anymore. And wait a minute, I thought it was working. What happened here?
Mm.
You know,
Mm.
I'm reminded a
Yeah.
little bit of my brother, my older brother. He just got fired recently. He had been like doing great in his job. On Wednesday they're sending him accolades, and the middle managers immediately above him were like, oh my god, you're doing great. He was getting bonuses and gifts and all this sort of stuff. And then on Thursday, the three bosses up called him and fired him on the spot, and in 5 minutes everything was done. You know what I mean? And middle managers were taken aback. They had no idea what is happening here. What, we love this guy, what are you know what I mean? And so I feel like this is kind of like that setup here, where there's like the middle management is not ready.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, and thinking about the whole process of this sun through Aquarius, right? It's like the moon, when it moves into that last quarter square in Scorpio, is going to be like very close to that Saturn. I didn't look up the chart, but it's going to be like, very close at that point. And of course, Saturn's speedy, but having that like happening at the same time as the Mercury. So throughout Mercury's retrograde, Mercury didn't actually make it all the way to Pluto before it's stationed, right? And so it made these like the sextile to Neptune, the trine to Uranus. And so it made its own, all these aspects, but it didn't actually make it to Pluto. And so in that, just a couple days after this, right, during that last quarter moon, that's when Mercury finally hits Pluto. And that feels like a huge exclamation point. Well, maybe it's not an exclamation point. It might just be a period of this whole Mercury through Capricorn process. Because of course, then, as you said, it's like Mercury kind of like has sped up by this point and like zooms through into Pisces. And that's when like things change. So this feels like there's a lot of like punctuation going on and hitting those moments of consequence and like Saturn going under the beams and being like, okay, so what processes are we like not aware of anymore? Like what did we initiate that has now either stopped working or has just disappeared from our view, right? Like what processes are in motion? I think about this with like health stuff, right? It's like what has happened that now is suddenly like not visible, or it's like if the symptoms have disappeared, that doesn't necessarily mean like something's been fixed. That feels kind of this moment in this process with the moon.
Yeah,
Oh, that's so
1,000%
interesting.
agree.
Say again,
Yeah.
Cameron.
Yeah, no, I was saying 1,000% agree, because I'm always casting it from Washington D.C. and in that chart specifically, when Mercury hits Pluto, it's going to be in conjunction with the ascendant of this full moon chart, and so like that just echoes what you're saying like very strongly. And so yeah, just to reflect on that, it's going to be there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that came into my mind when you were talking about Mercury, Pluto, and Saturn going under the beams, and there's something invisible that like you've set it into motion, and then something invisible is taking place here. The thing that came into my head when you were talking about that was AI, like like setting algorithms and
Mm-hmm.
rules, like computer programming
Mm,
rules up, and then kind of like
mm,
letting it go do its thing, and then not being aware of all of like you're only aware of the things that it's spitting back out at you. You're not aware of all the things that it's not spitting out at you. And
1000%.
so
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to
Wow.
say about
Yeah.
that other than like eek.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
it
That's
works on
a
so many levels. Yeah.
cool house.
It just works on so many levels too, like thinking about the Washington chart and thinking about like um yeah, like these looming strikes, right? Like forever. And it's like, okay, so these Saturn Uranus things, what about the Saturn Uranus gets quiet at this point, but like doesn't actually hasn't actually disappeared, like is
Mm.
still there. Mm, yeah, like what? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was looking at something the other day, and it was just to the AI thing. And this guy was basically he was talking to the technology, and he was asking about what was he asking about? Oh, he said something about like Jesus and Mary Magdalene's relationship or something like that. And then, like the AI specifically was like, this basically has no precedence at all. And then the guy asked another question about like these other texts that aren't in the like canonical Bible. And basically AI is like, oh well, if you say it that way, then it was like a totally different situation.
Hmm.
It's like even the information that's being put in is like, yeah, it's just that made me think of that. It's really interesting. Yeah, what it won't say based off of how it's computed already or like programmed.
Yeah, there's something about like language learning there.
Hmm.
If we're thinking about like Mercury, Pluto, you could do Mercury, Pluto, and you could be
Mm.
like speaking truth to power or something like that. Oh, but you could also get into like learning the language that power uses.
Well, and how so much of truth depends on asking the right questions, knowing
Ooh,
how to ask the questions.
there it is.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Mm. Well,
Very
and I mean,
mysterious.
because then we have Venus into Aquarius in the next week, which also it's
Aries,
another one
right?
of these
Venus
like
into
little
Aries.
um no, Mercury into Aquarius. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
sure.
And then but Venus with Neptune. Of course, like as soon as you bring up Neptune, like word salad happens. Yeah.
Hmm.
And then the Saturn Cazimi, which is really like also one of those
Mm.
punctuation marks, I feel like.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's fast. Yeah.
Yeah, the Aquarius stuff is likely to get and not just the Aquarius stuff, but the fixed sign stuff is likely to get loud during this time, you know, in a way that it maybe didn't need to be before that full moon took place. It was like it was loud in the way that that machine noise is loud,
Mm.
like when it's just on and you don't notice it necessarily because like your neighbor's air conditioning is on or something like that, and then it just becomes part of the silence or something like that. Like when there's no sound going on, then it sounds like silence until the air conditioner turns off, and then you're like, oh, I didn't even realize how loud that was. It feels like there's that kind of ongoing droning, monotonous, super loud uh
Mm.
stuff that you just like don't even notice. And then when we get to that full moon and that Uranus wants to show up, and then the Kazemi moment, I didn't think to pull up that Saturn Kazemi chart and stuff like that, but like looking at all that sort of stuff, that like it looks like it wants to sort of come out at that time and uh make you aware of some of the things that you might have sort of taken for granted in that area. Also, not for
Mhm.
nothing, that full moon is at 16 degrees of Leo, which is right on that square to the eclipse that happened. the full
right
moon. I think that
there.
was the full moon lunar eclipse in Taurus, which was conjunct Uranus. So it's right there. That Leo full moon is right there, talking directly to that eclipse. So especially people who have like fixed sign placements or who've been getting rocked by these eclipses, then you're likely to feel that shit at that time.
Great.
Oh yeah. It's like
I don't know.
living.
I'm kind of a fan of eclipse processes, like on a kind of personal, interpersonal level. I think there's a lot of like necessary composting that happens, and yeah, rejuvenation. So these like midpoints between eclipses, I think, are pivots in curious ways.
Yeah, I find that they're like way more manageable if you pay attention to them, honestly.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
I highly recommend people get into it more. Yeah, this one's right on my sun, north node, square. Yeah, it's fucking me up a little bit, honestly. I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah. Whenever I see people who are like going through stuff, and like I saw the first time I thought of this phrase was when I saw people with Saturn Pluto in Libra coming in. I did so many Saturn Pluto and Libra readings while Saturn Pluto was happening in Capricorn. Just like everybody who was coming through the door was Saturn Pluto. And so I was like, oh, like you are the hero that Gotham needs. You know what I mean? Like you have been through the like Saturn Pluto. You are specially designed for this moment. And so this is kind of how I feel about like people who are getting rocked by eclipses or whatever, you know, like whenever that sort of thing is happening, then like you are queued up in this moment. This moment is for you to come out here and do your damn thing, because you were like this. Shout out Channing Nicholas. You were made for this, right? Or you were born for this, you know?
Well, yeah, and thinking about these like last moments of Pluto and Capricorn too as being the last moments of the Pluto and Libra generations, Pluto squares, right? And it's just like that's such a big, it's like, okay, you're actually adults now. Sorry, there's like no way around it. Yeah, and how it's just been such a long trip for them, such a long trip.
Oh yeah.
And then it's all of us Pluto and Scorpios, Pluto squares. It's like next chapter, right? Like next chapter of generational responsibility, change of management.
Ooh, that's a really good, that is real. I had not thought to put it together that way before, but like generational responsibility, that is really resonant in these Saturn signs and whatnot. Like, I'm gonna have to think with that one.
Yeah, I feel like Pluto and Scorpios are gonna have a it's like, what do you mean we've based our whole thing off like, you know, rebelling and tearing down these systems. It's like, oh shit, we need systems.
Yep.
What?
Yep.
But that's not until Pluto and Aquarius, and we're still in Pluto and Capricorn.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we're wrapping this one up. We're still wrapping this one up. So somehow it's so easy to get excited about the stuff because like all we do is talk about the same shit all the time, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a kind of avoidance in it too, though, for sure. It's like I wonder, I mean, I'm not a big forecaster, right? Like when people come see me for sessions, it's like, yeah, we're going to look into the future, but we're only looking into the future based on like what we've gone through in the past. Right? And I feel like a lot of astrologers work like that, but you know, I don't offer like 6 month ahead readings or anything. It's like we're like always really firmly rooted in like the now moment. And so forecasting, like sometimes I'm like, okay, it's like, what does the future say about now? Like that's the question. And that's why I'm doing this with you guys, because I feel like you're very good at that. You're both very good at that. And so being able to really like be in it, and the fact that we ourselves, like it says something about the astrology of the quarter that we ourselves are like wanting to jump ahead. And that feels like that ending of the beginning, right? It is that energy.
Yeah, the proof is in the pudding in many ways in that way. Yeah, I run into that with clients a lot also. Like they'll be like, "Yeah, let's talk about the year ahead." And I'll be like, "Okay, well, we need to talk about last year before we can do that." I'll make it halfway through the reading and they're like, "Yeah, but what about next year?" And I'm like, "Well, we're not there yet."
Yeah.
It's coming. It's inevitably coming.
Right.
But yeah, warnings.
So how do y'all feel about the new moon in Pisces? So we're talking about February 20th by now, February 20th, 2023. We've got this new moon in Pisces. Again, we're at 1 degree here. So we've got these new moons in the very beginning of the signs here. This one is ruled by Jupiter and not in aspect to Jupiter. So this is our first lunation of the year that hasn't been in aspect to Jupiter. Or of the quarter, at least, depending on where you want to start your year. But so that is interesting to me. This is also Saturn is closely conjunct this new moon as well. Well, even though it's still in Aquarius, this is a new moon in Pisces, and we've got Saturn in Aquarius, but it's less than 3 degrees away. So still feeling this. We're going to. I feel like this is a preview for Saturn in Pisces here. And Saturn is so close to Pisces at this point.
The fact that we get that Venus at 29:59, like right before the Saturn ingress. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, and this is the first lunation we have with Jupiter and Aries outside of its bound too. So it's interesting that it's ruling the lunation and also it like just lost its dignity there in that way. And the Venus is about to lose its dignity. Something about that. And then Pisces, even like from an evolutionary astrology perspective, if we look at it archetypally, it being the last sign, so it's like all this stuff is like kind of melty, falling away, kind of energy. And that I don't know how to verbalize that right now, but something about that all feels present to me when I'm looking at it right now.
It feels a little to me like losing grip. You know, like especially Saturn had such a strong grip on things, and then like as it went under the beams of the sun, and then we get this Uranus, and so that's like a jolt that might have like moved the thing, and so it's like trying to rejigger that grip, and then it's like and then like it's melting on you, like you didn't realize that it had been melting and this sort of stuff, and then it sort of like starts to slip away, and this is kind of our moment where we start to be like, oh, okay, it's getting weird now.
I just got like visions of like making chocolate and how like tricky it is to like keep the temperature the right way so that you don't burn it, but like you need it to simmer a little bit and like you need it all to melt together. And that, I just like that's so there we go. This is the tricky process of this, where it's like Jupiter and Aries, right? And being like, okay, well, we need this Pisces to be fueled, but we don't want to go too deep end with that like 29:59 Venus there.
Also, Moon Saturn is real. It can often be hard to regulate temperature, literally, with Moon Saturn. Like Moon Saturn will often be uncomfortable in your body in some kind of way. You know, like you're not resting properly, or you're whatever it is, and so that a lot of times in my body, I often find that I get cold or these kinds of things with the Moon Saturn. So, so I love that chocolate analogy.
Yeah, that's super appropriate, and it's going to be February 20th, so it's double time, quote, in Northern Hemisphere.
Sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's good reflection.
I was just thinking one of the offerings for the Saturn election this week is we got like really dark unsweetened chocolate, and it literally has a goat imprinted on it. It's like just perfect.
Love it. Nice and bitter.
Oh
But moving
Which,
on,
like with this Mars and Gemini, is like, and with this Mercury trying to, it's like there's a little bitterness in here, like
oh yeah.
28 Saturn.
Yeah, this is a pretty malefic new moon. You know, it's got the conjunction to Saturn, it's got a square to Mars, you know.
Hmm.
And Venus is there in Pisces, which makes you want it to be comfortable and fun and lavish and stuff, but it's like, oh, it might be like too much fun club or something like that. You know what I mean? It was a little too lavish and now you have to pay the price for that or something like this, you know,
Mm.
hangover mornings.
Mm. Yeah.
But then, you know, coming
Hmm.
off of that, then we get Venus moving into Aries, and then we have both Venus and Jupiter in Aries.
Hmm.
So this is pretty fun. Even so, in the next couple of days, so on the 22nd of February, so that I do elections and stuff, obviously, and so I have chosen this one as an election that is probably good for most folks to use. So this one is going to be also for fun. This is on the 22nd of February at 2:22 p.m. in my location, so that's fun. Um, so and that's got the you want to put 26 degrees of Cancer rising, or more importantly, you want Cancer rising and you want the midheaven to be with your benefics and the moon. The moon is there just like beautifully protected by those benefics. Like it's hard to be grumpy at a moon that is like in between benefics and not being like roughed up by any of there's no difficult stuff here. There's no like
Mm.
opposition or T square or any of that sort of shit. Like it's all just kind of harmonious and working together here. Now, Pallas, you had an idea about
Ah.
this Venus moment here, right?
And this actually kind of veers us through a couple things. I don't think we need to, um, well, maybe we could. Here, let me share, if I can share. Let me pull up this, because I'll look at the same chart, but I'm looking at the sunset chart here. Okay, you got that? You can see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. So, and I set this for Washington. So, what we're looking at here is the same day, right? But we're looking at like just at sunset here. So the thing I'm looking at, so this sky is incredible, right? So the first week of December, Venus became an evening star. So that means that when you're watching sunset, Venus should be, depending on your location, right? Whenever that happens, Venus should be visible if you can see the horizon now, like starting at the beginning of September. And so over the course of the next, between now and July, Venus is just going to like rise and rise and rise higher and higher after every sunset. And what happens over the course of these 7-8 months is that Venus will come to be conjunct the moon once a month. And so this is that like absolutely iconic like Venus and crescent, right? Like star and crescent imagery that is important like the world over. And so we can actually, being tuned into the Venus cycle, this is like the next layer. So it's like everyone was, you know, there was like a Kazemi Khan on Twitter that happened, which was like so cool. It was so that October 22nd, 2022.
Okay.
So that moment was this like conjunction, right? And then so beginning of September, Venus comes out from under the beams, rises as an evening star in like the western sky. And then what happens is we get these Venus moon conjunctions. So it's like the first one, or yeah, I think we should here. I'm actually gonna. So this is the one in December. So this is, I have 3 sunset charts. And so this is mostly showing people like this versus the sky, right? So at sunset, Venus will be here, Mercury and the moon. They'll all be visible like right after sunset. And then also Saturn will be in the sky, Jupiter will be in the sky, and Mars will be in the sky. So this is December 24th, right at sunset. And so this is this first Venus moon conjunction we're dealing with. And then we get the January one, which is January 22nd. We get the moon in Aquarius with the Saturn Venus conjunction, right? So these will be super close. We get Jupiter in the sky too. We'll still have Mars in the sky. So this is the second Venus moon conjunction. And then this chart in February, Saturn, right, has gone under the beams, is below, right? Venus, or Mercury is actually has become a morning star. And then we have this Venus, Jupiter, moon. This will be like absolutely stunning. They're all like so close in declination too. So this is just a way to tune into the Venus cycle on an even deeper level by watching each monthly Venus crescent moon conjunction as Venus like rises higher and higher in the sky. Yeah. So this is what I was kind of, like the import of these moments has been tracked by humans for millennia, right? And the way they allow us to experience the movements of the heavens as we track, especially through the winter. Like Venus evening star during a northern hemisphere winter is like it's such good sky gazing. And so this is like a really good time if anyone's been wanting to get more into like the visible astrology side of things. This is like a really good way to get into it, because when it's a crescent moon, the sky is still relatively dark, so you can see things like Saturn, right? You can see things like the stars and where things are positioned. Yeah, so that was my feelings about this.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really, really good. That also, oh, I'm sorry, say again?
No, I was saying thanks for sharing that. That's epic. I love it.
For sure. Yeah, I spend a lot of time in my dailies and weeklies telling people to go outside and look at the stars and look at the sky, see what's happening. And because it's a great way for you to actually get involved with it. Like what we're doing here, we're like looking at this chart and looking at these symbols and all this sort of stuff. Like this doesn't really make that much sense, or like doesn't really resonate, unless you know what you're looking at and you know how to read the chart or whatever. But if you go out and look at the sky, then it has a noticeable impact on just like viscerally the way that, like I remember the first time I showed my mom that crescent moon with Venus situation. I like went out there and showed her that, and she was like, and then we like hung out for a while and like let it get darker and darker and saw the sky, and she was like, there are so many stars. No, you don't understand, there are so many stars. And so we just like kept looking at the stars. And so, and she's not an astrologer or a stargazer or anything like this, but she had this like very important visceral reaction to that. And so you, as someone who's made it 2 hours into this recording because you're interested in astrology or whatever, like you will also have that same feeling and recognition of the connection between whatever that is and whatever I am as well. Wherever I am in life, you'll be able to see that and really feel that in a bodily and connected kind of way, like using your body to witness the thing, to be a part of that thing. And indeed, to witness a thing is to participate in the event. And so there's something really, really special and exciting there. Definitely.
Yeah. And thinking about like all the talk about the like Venus and Capricorn retrograde, right? So in the context of her wider cycle, it's like that retrograde happened, and then October was like last winter, and then October was the inferior conjunction, right? Or the superior conjunction. And then now as she rises in the sky as an evening star, she starts descending like into the Leo retrograde that's coming in July, August, right? And so it's like the being able to sort of watch this and like track this Venus rising, like with Jupiter, with the moon, right? We'll like eventually get to Mars eventually. There's like if we're thinking about preparation and we're thinking about warning and we're thinking about how things may get weird in the summer, right? Which will align with this Venus retrograde in Leo hitting off, say, a similar place as that Leo full moon, right? And like hitting off the eclipse points, and we'll have moved into other things by that point, but the yeah, it's just like resourcing with Venus in a way to be prepared feels really potent, and a way to like, yeah, engage with the sky and engage with time and be changed by it.
Yeah.
Kind of letting it do its work.
And to welcome that change as well.
Yeah.
By turning your face toward it.
Yeah.
It's like the most literal translation of light that you could actually experience in reality.
Right. Totally. And that's what the moon does, right? That's like, so the moon translates the light, right? And so that's the idea of like the moon moving from one planet to a next planet and sort of moving the light. But then there's another idea or concept here, which is the idea that the moon is the closest object to us, and it orbits around us. And so it creates a sort of a sphere of influence around the Earth, around where we are. And so where we live, this is the sublunar domain, right? We are underneath the moon. And so then everything else that happens out there in the wider cosmos, it has to go through that lunar sphere in order to get to us. And so at a moment like this, especially with both benefics there, and it's going to be super bright and spectacular and all this, you know, like that looks like it really wants to, really just speak the translation really feels real there, and you'll be able to witness the moon's influence in that way on the tides and all the rest of it, you know.
Yeah, and the moon even representing the body, and just getting real more in touch with that, it could be really spectacular. Yeah, because before I was ever even into technical astrology and stuff like that, I would just do that, just go outside and let the light hit my body and just like tune in from that perspective. And yeah, that has its benefits that I feel like a lot of people could do justice to tune into more.
Absolutely.
Yeah, be here now, right?
1,000.
So then,
and just for people who are like quite unfamiliar, it's like you can go out a couple, like probably 3 nights in a row and see a very similar formation. So it's not like, if it's cloudy on the 22nd, right? It's like you can look on the 21st and you can look on the 23rd, and it'll still have that feeling.
Yeah, everything doesn't have to be a pick a trick selection.
No. Well, the moon might be too small on the first anyway, but on like the 23rd and 24th, you can,
Yeah, go outside and verify. There. Get in the comment section and be like, listen, I went out there and saw it, and it wasn't like what y'all said at all. Like, go, I welcome this kind of commentary. Bring it on. So, so then from there, we're really into transition time, right? So Mercury is going to move into Pisces. And then after that, so here I've got the full moon in Virgo pulled up, and we can see that Saturn is here at 29:59 of Aquarius. And in, 2 hours or something like that, Saturn is going to move into Pisces, and that is for keeps. There are no take backsies on this one. Saturn is just in Pisces, and it's a wrap on Aquarius now. This is the real transition point.
Blessings to mutable angles in my prayers. Totally. We're in it. I am one, so
Same. Yeah.
Deeply confusing. Deeply confusing this whole time. Mars has been retrograde over your mutable angles this whole time, and retrograde and forward grade and what, like back and forth and forward and back and all that sort of thing. And then here, so Mercury moves into Pisces. Mercury moving into Pisces is not a clarifying aspect, right? That's not something that's going to make things like, oh, I get it now, unless it's that sort of like, sort of psychedelic experiential, like, oh, the world is really made of cheese. I like was aware of that, but now I like, oh, now I actually know it in my bones, or like whatever it is that the ayahuasca told you or whatever, like that, you can get that sort of in your bones feeling here with Mercury and Pisces, but like the explanation of it, the prosaic, like here's the step-by-step rundown of what it is, like that's not happening at this time with Mercury and Pisces, opposite to or square to Mars and Gemini, and then the moon there in Virgo opposite to that. Like it's
Mercury and Pisces.
talk about it.
Yeah, Mercury and Pisces is more likely to be able to find an expression for that confusion, though. Even if it doesn't make sense, it can make something else with it.
For sure. Yeah, real good for melody, song, poetry. Say what, Cameron?
Yeah, I was about to say, even if it doesn't turn into like words that you're translating directly to somebody to make it make sense easily, it can still, definitely do some things. Like you said, artful, poetic. Even, I don't know, feeling like some channeling stuff could go on here, like pretty nice.
Oh yeah, big time.
Yeah.
I feel like as we get into Mercury retrogrades in Earth signs, that's probably going to be really good for that as well. And we're going to have Mercury in Virgo opposite to Neptune in Pisces, opposite to Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, which again doesn't look very good for the sort of like clarifying, understandable information bit. But if you want to do something like channeling or mediumship or any of this kind of like deeper spiritual work or something like that, then that's probably a good time for that. Psychedelics. It's probably a good time for that.
Yeah, I think it could be a good time too to reorganize one's relationship with like the supreme or the source or all knowing things, It could be a really good time for that, because oftentimes when we experience that, it is kind of destructive and subjectively difficult to just have our whole reality reorganized in that way. So that is one way to use that in a way that's like productive.
Yeah, when you said you were going to use this Mercury and Pisces to reorganize, I was like, what? But to reorganize your relationship to the supreme. I love that word supreme as well, because there's something like really glorious and ineffable about supreme. Like you can't
it's very Saturn and Pisces.
Tell me about that. What do you?
Oh, I've been thinking a lot about like Saturn, as because we're doing so much Saturn election work right now in this house, and just thinking about Saturn as like the king of the golden age, and like we live in Zeus's world, or some, in one way of understanding things, but it's like Saturn was, the king before Jupiter was. And so just like thinking back to sort of like why that would have been, in this culture, like if we're looking back if we're looking through the lens of Greek mythology and then like into the Roman, it's like, what would Saturn have been like as king? Like it's a different world. And so with Saturn and Pisces and like, being under Jupiter's rulership, and then there's, this relating to, I think of like, I don't know, there's something about that, and just like the supreme, and like, what does it, Jupiter is way more invested in like everybody's thriving, right? And it's like, what does it look like with Saturn and Pisces instead?
Yeah. And what is supreme is like actually what's happening in the reality beyond my imagination. And that is what actually is supreme from my perspective. So that makes total sense to me.
The Saturn reality. Peace. I love it.
One thing that I think is really interesting here is often when I think about supreme, then I think about sort of sun significations. I think about like, And whenever I think about the sun, then it's like the self, the source, the light. It's the thing that it always moves 1 degree a day. It never moves retrograde. It doesn't really fluctuate in its speed very much. Like just is super constant. It's the very same all the time. You can talk about how the spark of life, the thing that's in your eyes, right? That you can, if you make eye contact with people, then you can see that there's a person in there or their soul, or you can see that they're crazy or whatever it is, right? So, and that is the same thing from birth all the way through death. There's that same sort of spark that comes out through your eyes, right? And so so I often think about the kind of unchanging nature of that thing, how it's all the one thing forever and ever, amen. But here, with such a strong emphasis on mutable things, right? So Saturn is about to move into Pisces, and we've still got this Mars in Gemini, and we've got this full moon in Virgo that's going on here. And that full moon in Virgo is ruled by Mercury in Pisces. This is very changeable. This is very adaptable. And it sort of like reminds me that Octavia Butler said that God is change, And so we might be in that space here where the changeable nature of the supreme comes to the forefront in some kind of important way.
Yeah, 1000%. And that can be structure is something that like I often remind people, it's like, even if you think about, we say like God. So it's like, if that's the structure right now, it's like generation, organization, destruction. And like, how can you get with that mutability and being able to be in the flux and the change while still like being stable and having some sense of structure or maybe even definition in and of itself, Yeah, because even definition might be a better word than structure, because maybe there's not so much structure, but you could define things in a way where flow is the thing that's holding it all together.
Ooh.
Well, and when we're talking about like looking at the heavens and letting them do their work, right? Which is sort of, it's a gesture to an Anne Carson quotation about letting the gods in to do their work, like to our life in this discussion of Eros. And like, who are we subject to? There's something to that. There's something to that in this. It's like forecasting itself, maybe even astrology itself. It's like these warnings and there's preparation. It's like how it is about getting into flow. And it's like with Saturn moving into Pisces, that feels even more consequential, right? Like I think there can be this, I mean, the mutables among us, right? We often function best when in that state, right? And then, but it can be seen as sort of indulgent or neurotic or like, various things that people use to describe mutable signs. But with, Saturn moving into Pisces, it does, there's something about that state being like, what is challenged and like what is necessary and what is consequential to be able to actually adjust not only our conceptions of like wealth and health and connection and presence and the divine, right? But also like the realities of those things. Yeah.
And situating.
Go ahead, Zamboni.
Well, situating those things in flow is so important. When you mentioned that, Cameron, the thing that came into my head was currents in the ocean. Like there are major currents that like tie together the whole world from one ocean to the next and this kind of thing. And there's no real border on it, right? There's no way to know that you're in the current until you get swept up in the current. And now you're going with this flow here, right? So there wasn't a wall on either side, like a channel, the way that we were talking about last time. We were talking about boundaries as generating a channel that can facilitate connection. That's what we talked about in the last forecast here, right? And so this kind of like generating something solid that can make it possible, right? Whereas like the currents in the ocean, and I can't there are like some famous currents that like go long distances and stuff like this. Can't think of any names right now off the top, but like that,
Jet stream.
that, say again?
The jet stream.
There it is.
We're moving. Yeah.
Exactly. So you're in this, so there's flow here, and that flow, and the thing that actually made me think of that was like when you were talking about flow, I was thinking about like Chinese meridians and this sort of stuff, right? We're not talking specifically about veins which have a wall, but we're talking about the flow of chi, or the flow of energy, right? And this kind of thing. And that is not that can even come off your skin a little bit. There's like a field where that takes place, right? And so finding ways to so acupuncture is a really good idea here as for ways of like getting into, tapping into, coming into a more perfect flow kind of model, or using flow as the model rather than structure, or I don't know, something like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. With this Mars square the lunation, I thought of acupuncture immediately. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. Also, something else I've been thinking about with Saturn going into Pisces is, it's really fucking tough to be compassionate all the time where we're at in the world, and that's going to be work for people to get compassionate and to like forgive themselves and forgive others. And so I think that's something that people should look forward to, learning that compassion and honestly just getting really clear about how difficult that really is. It's really tough to just be compassionate consistently, especially with the things that are going on right now. And I think it's important to sink into that a bit.
Yeah, there's so much internalizing negative consequences or having to metabolize them. Like, I'm off Twitter now, but like thinking about the ways in which the platform, and this is just one example of this process happening all over, right? But thinking about the ways in which the platform is changing for the worse, or people are perceiving it as changing it for the worse, but they're still using it, and they're still going to use it because like there's so much good that happens there. But now that good is coming with like a higher toll, right? Is coming with like a lot more, or maybe not a lot more, but like more ethical quandary around using it, right? And so it's like people just kind of having to internalize that in order to like maintain a status quo, or in order to like maintain their own conception of success or wealth, or right. It's like, what do we and so this piece about Saturn moving into Pisces, like I thought of compassion too when we were mentioning like the flow thing, because it's part of it, right? Like not get, there's so many like jagged edges to get caught on, and they're just like, seems to be more. And I'm hoping that Saturn in Pisces offers like a little bit of relief from the heaviness of so much of that. It's a different kind of heaviness, but
the heaviness of it's time to pray and work.
Pisces is big deep ocean stuff, so it's dark in there. It's damn near outer space, like there's the sea monsters and all this sort of stuff that like stuff that Saturn in Aquarius wasn't really thinking about, because Saturn in Aquarius had systems to maintain and this kind of stuff, but Saturn moving into Pisces is now going to step into this place where like there's all this other stuff going on here. And I think that it's also it's no longer reliant on itself, really importantly. Saturn no longer rules itself, but rather is ruled by someone else now. And so in order to figure out what's going on with Saturn, we're always going to look to Jupiter to see how Jupiter feels about things, whereas before, when it was Jupiter in Capricorn and Jupiter in Aquarius, then we were like, okay, well, in order to see what's going on with Jupiter, we need to see how Saturn feels about things. Now that's going to flip on its head. And so then we're leaning into, so Jupiter is going to change signs every year. right? Whereas Saturn has just been ruling his damn self for as long as I've been doing astrology, you know? So it's, yeah, right? Yeah, from that 2018 spring equinox, like from that whole time period, it's just been all Saturn all the time. And now Saturn is going to be dependent on someone else. And so we're looking at this kind of changeability. We're looking at, you know, a kind of intersectionality that I think is going to be really important. And so when I, you know, thinking with the compassion that you guys brought up and all this sort of stuff, that feels really like, how am I going to optimize this energy, you know? But I don't necessarily know that most people are going to take that route. You know what I mean? When I think about Twitter, the first thing that I think about is not compassion. You know what I mean? So
yeah, it's like unconscious projections of like my deepest hopelessness,
right.
And also projecting my hopefulness, and you're not going along with that, so I'm going to judge you.
So
and I feel like Saturn with
now
Neptune,
with profits to Elon
Musk. Say that again.
Well, I feel
now
like
with the profits to yeah, no, Zamboni go.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you know, the one particular technocrat being whoever it is, like that's kind of whatever. Yeah, but like, exactly. You know, I feel like Jupiter or Saturn with Neptune is going to be real big on the unconscious projections and then judging as a result of my own internalized narrative. Like, big room for that during that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things is I'm going back to Saturn and Pisces. I was just thinking about with the talk of the ocean too, it's like the creatures that live in the deep sea, like the thing that they all share is an ability to withstand massive pressure. Right? So there's something about that with Saturn and Pisces. And it's like, it's not the same kind of structure, but it's like, what does it take to withstand the pressure of the deep ocean?
That is so interesting, because one of the things that it requires, that the deep ocean requires, is flexibility. You think about octopuses, right? Invertebrates in the bottom of the ocean. Because if you've got a vertebra, then it's going to snap under that kind of pressure.
Oh, and you can't have oxygen in your blood. like if we get really into it, but it's like, you know, humans go down. It's like the reason we implode is because like the oxygen in our blood, like the pressure in our blood is so different than the pressure outside of it that it like we collapse, right? Versus, yeah, those deep ocean fish. So in a new age of air, it's like, what does that say about that? In this coming out of Jupiter and Saturn and Aquarius, it's like, what does Saturn and Pisces have to say about that kind of pressure?
And if we're thinking about currents and flow and this kind of thing, and in the era of air, then like I would imagine that jet stream style currents have a lot to say about air currents as well. Speaking as somebody who has no idea about these things, but because I know that it's all the one thing, my guess is that there's a connection here, you know?
In the NORAC talk I did, which is for sale, I talked about, I used like air pressure as kind of a new analogy for thinking about, and this is like riffing off a thing that Austin Coppock said, of course. But yeah, it's like, what does thinking with like air movements and weather patterns mean? And then, so this takes it kind of into that, into the like territory of water too, right? And of course, it's like, it's all the evaporation cycle, like it's evaporation, condensation, precipitation, right? It's like, so moving into that, it's maybe less about where those air currents meet the land, right? And it's more about thinking of how much it fucking rains or it doesn't, depending on what the airflow is doing.
Indeed. That's a good segue. So where can people find that talk, Pallas? if they want to hear you?
I'm technically on work hiatus still. This is the only thing I
So it's
come
not
out
for
of
sale.
hiatus
Just a
to
second
do.
ago, you were like,
No,
this
no,
talk
it
is for
is.
sale.
It's for sale on the NORWAC website.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can go to
you
norwac.net.
you can get the video and the audio there.
Mm-hmm. And if you want to keep up with Palestine, you got to get on the mailing list, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where's that mailing list?
It is. Well, if you go to nineofwands.com, that's all spelled out. And then that is where you'll find there's tons of pop-ups and a mailing list page. You can't avoid it if you go to my website.
Awesome.
I guess I'll also be I'll be more present on the Instagram, and then also you can get at it through through my mailing list too. But there is some fun things happening with there's just like some project announcements that are fun and that are definitely astrology and also magic related. And I'm not going to talk about them now because I'll talk about them more next quarter, but there'll be sort of some hints and I will be a little bit more present online. Sort of working up to those announcements.
Exciting. Awesome. nineofwands.com. Cameron, where can the people find you?
They can find me on my website at www.cadreamplanet.com. They can find me, well, I don't know something, but I'm doing a 2023 forecast with Astrology Hub. And that's in a few days. So I don't know if this will be up by December 10th. I'm doing a 2023 forecast with Ascendant Assemblies, and that's in January. I'm doing another 2023 forecast that's going to add in like Kundalini yoga and embodiment practices, and that's going to be in Memphis, Tennessee, closer to the end of January as well. I have on December 17th, I have holistic embodied astrology talk over Capricorn. In January, the very beginning of January, I have a 5-week course coming out over medical astrology. It's like the 201 version of it. And it's going to be about, it's like from celestial watchers to like terrestrial embodied practitioners. And it's over holistic health and astrology, even though it's over medical astrology. So anybody could go and take that course, and it would just be over general overall themes that one would have to embody before they start to practice with other people in a way where you have to be certified in nothing. And these are all the very basics of reality and life and health, and how to look at it from an emotional, psychological, and physiological perspective to be able to just give people nuggets throughout your life. If you're a practitioner and also for yourself. I think that's it. I'm probably lying, but that's all good. So yeah.
Yeah.
And you can find me at Instagram. So yeah.
Right.
Is that course through Kepler, or is that?
Yeah, the holistic embodied astrology course is through Kepler College, and you can still get all the other ones from the year. In the medical astrology or holistic health and astrology ones with Synchronicity University.
Cool.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. And I imagine that there are probably announcements for all that happening on both your website, cadreamplanet.com, as well as on your Instagram. Did you say?
Instagram is mostly where it's going to be at. Oh, I did forget something else. Okay, so in middle of February, I'm pretty sure like February 12th, if you happen to be in the LA area, I'm doing a workshop at what's called the Conscious Life Expo out in LA. So that's going to be something I'm doing too, an event I'm having. Yeah.
Awesome. I love all these in-person events too. That's going to be really great. So Memphis people and the LA people can turn up and see my boy Cameron. Love it.
Oh yeah.
Cool. So if you're interested in checking out the ZamboniFunk project, you can always check me out on Instagram and TikTok, where I do daily and weekly forecasts. Those are free. I also, in the style of those weeklies, those weeklies are about 10 minutes long. And so I now do video readings for people who can't necessarily they can't make my schedule, or who aren't ready to spend over $100 for an hour-long reading or whatever. Then you can get a 10-minute video of me just doing what I do for the weeklies, but doing it for your chart and the transits that you're going through. So you can give me a question and I will send you a 10-minute video. And so that'll be fun. All of that can be found at ZamboniFunk.com. You can also find the Can't Help Myself merchandise. There is the painting is super dope. The painting is 12 by 12 inches, but you can get an 18 by 18 poster. That poster is huge and great. It is so cool to have this giant image. And the image is so in depth, and there's so much to it. You can see there's always something else to look at. I love being able to look at it. There are hoodies available. You'll be able to find all that stuff. You can check it out, patreon.com/ZamboniFunk. And if you want to, I do an Astro Basics course. So if you want to get a little bit deeper in and understand the kinds of things that we're doing here, I'm no Austin Coppock or Kelly Surtees. I'm not going to make you into a consulting astrologer, but I will help you to understand YouTube astrologers and that sort of stuff a little more deeply. You can also find an electional report there to help you time the things in your life. Thank you for everyone who made it this far. I super appreciate all y'all for being here. Thank you to the people who made this whole thing possible. We give thanks to the ancestors of our craft. We give thanks to the ancestors of our bodies, the ancestors of this place. We give thanks to the land, which continues to hold us up. Yes, the earth continues to support us even in this time. No matter what happens, nothing could ever separate me from the living body of the earth mother. It is a beautiful, beautiful thing. We give thanks for that indefinitely. We give thanks to the descendants for enjoying the fruits of our labor and for putting up with the bullshit that we don't do a good job with. We give thanks to the one most high creator. Thank you all for being here together with us in this moment. I look forward to seeing y'all next time. Bye.